In this video we'll start talking about using the editor to create the actual controls and the heart of the display. So what I've done here is I've created a blank setup, but I've defined variables in the different categories that I've talked about in prior videos. So I used the Browse L5X tool to drag in these different variables. So I've got a complete set of variables to work with. I've got the display resolution set properly, so now I'm going to start actually putting the controls in place. So we do that through the Edit tool, and that brings up this floating window with 3 columns. So the leftmost column, it allows you to select new controls to double click or drag and drop into the currently selected surface of the HMI. When you've selected a control, this will show the properties of that particular control, and then the rightmost column is the links to the variables that I've created. So let's start with just a analog indicator. So we can drag and drop and it places it exactly where you let go of it, or you can double click, and when you double click it puts it right below the last added control. So I've just added 2 analog indicators, and the one is selected with showing these adornment rectangles around the different edges, so you can tell when a control is selected or not. So you can select the control using that drag, where it shows you a rectangle and anything crossing the edge of the rectangle gets selected. You can also deselect by clicking into the background and then left click to select a single variable. And if you want to add to that selection, you can either use Shift or Control key and then click the next variable you would want to add. If you don't press the Shift or Control key and you select another variable, it switches this. It basically deselects the prior selected set. So with 2 variables shown here, we can look at the properties of each, and I can manipulate by dragging, changing the width, and you can see the width and the left properties changing as I do that. You can also type in a value you would want and the control will update. So now I've got one control that looks a little bit different than the other. I can select them both, and the values that are not the same are blank. So if I type in values here, it makes all the selected controls set to that value. And other properties for the control are fairly self-explanatory. In this video we're mostly just going to talk about using the editor. So there's also, well, let's talk about just linking them to variables. So the PLC tag is where you would define which PLC variable is used for each control. So I'm going to select the first one. I'm going to open this tree viewer, and it allows me to browse through all the variables that I've set up in the variable browser. So let's say I wanted to find NGP. So there was the first occurrence of NGP, and if I hit find again it goes to the next one. So let's take this first one and double click it, and it linked that first variable to NGP. It updated the label and the units matching what was created in the variable setup table. If I change this label here, it's going to also change the label in the variable setup. So they are linked, not independent. So the next one, I can make that link to this NPT variable and change description, units, label in the properties if I need to. You could also drag and drop the variables into the PLC tag field, or just manually edit. If you wanted to change the linkage, let's just take a guess and go to 50. So it updated that to the entry at PLC HMI analog array 50. Okay, so that's just a little bit about the PLC tag. Now let's talk more about the editing. So as you move things around, you have snap lines that try to line up the controls. So the red lines that you see showing up briefly, those are the snap lines. You can turn those off with this checkbox. So when you have a lot of controls, the snapping can get a little irritating when there's too many controls, and it prevents you from easily manipulating the position. Generally you're going to want them on though. You can also change the tolerance of the snap to make it greater or larger, holding it in place when it's close. You can also move the controls with arrow keys. So if you're looking for a fine adjustment pixel by pixel, just use the arrow keys. And you can change the width of a control by control arrow key right, and the height with control arrow key down. So those allow fine positioning. There are some context menus that give you some tools for positioning and sizing controls. So I've right-clicked and I can align. I better bring that over a little bit. It doesn't show on the video. Right-click, align. If I want to align left, I would press F6 or just click this context menu and everything's aligned left. If I want to remove spacing, remove vertical, F4. So that brings them together. So it's nice to be able to use the hotkeys. Select the controls, F4, and then F6. So some really nice tools for quickly positioning a group of controls. And one last trick for this video, and that's zooming. So if you get a lot of controls in a really tight area and things are getting hard to see, what you can do is use either Control plus or escape to unzoom, F3 and left mouse button. So I used F3 with the left mouse button, and now I'm zoomed in. I'll select this control, and now I can see a little more clearly what I'm doing.